Yes. So I was talking to Tony, who did the last speech before his speech, and we were kind of debating which spot is better, like the one directly before lunch, because everybody's just going to wait for lunch, or is it the one after lunch, where everybody's still in her or his suppenkoma. But I think after this exercise now, it should be pretty clear that we should be back here again. I would like to, in the next 30 minutes, introduce you to an idea which changed the way I think about work. And here's my first question to you. How many of you would want that other people sometimes simply did what you asked them to do? Some people? Some not? Okay, I'm happy that I'm not the only one who has some expectations or who wants to do others to do something. In the last years in my work life and as a millennial, being around other millennials a lot, I observed that people nowadays, especially young people, love to ask the question why a lot when they're asked to do something. Like, why are you doing this? Or why should I do this thing and not the other? I could just, I don't know, instead of really work hard and put a lot of effort in my work, I could stay at home and chill, like young people, or watch Netflix. And the problem is that these people might be your employees, they might be on your team, and you might need to motivate them, or they might be your colleagues, or even worse, they might be the best friend of the guy or girl you're trying to date. And then I understood a simple idea which was inspired by people and movements which I think we all know. And here's the deal for the next 28 minutes. You don't need to be a granola crunching, inspirational social media quotes posting and tree hugging millennial to do this. You only need to be a bit open. And I would ask you to turn to your neighbor now and tell them there is hope for you. You only need to be a bit open. Because the idea which I'm talking about is actually not progressive at all. It is actually as simple and old as humanity itself. Leadership impact means to create a world where people want to belong to. So I thought about this a bit, and for me this means to be able to show other people to how they can connect to something which matters to them, which is important to them on a personal level. And look around us, like we're living in a world, in a society where the self-development industry is booming. Like we have literally 100 places in Vienna where you can go meditate to find your inner peace and purpose. Another 100 where you can do yoga, from hot yoga to belly yoga, and even self-responsibility yoga. And I also didn't know what that was before. Also, platforms such as TEDx and are booming. And let's not forget, we are in the middle of one of the biggest movements that have ever existed, the climate movement. Last Friday alone, there were 4 million people worldwide on the streets on one day to protest and strike. So what does that have to do with leadership and with us leaders interested in agile leadership? Well, I would like to try to explain why I do think that it has a connection. I think the demand for leadership impact mainly depends on one thing, which is the perceived problems an individual or a group of people has. And I think that's quite a basic statement. So the more problems I have, the more I'm going to demand leadership impact and purpose. So it should look somewhat like this, a graph. Does that somewhat make sense? And of course, not everybody's going to be exactly there. We might have some people like around here. This would be probably the idealists. So the people who already demand leadership impact, but don't, although there is not a problem here yet. But I think they are not the norm, they are more the exception. And I think the same goes for these people. They, I don't know how to call them, but these would be the ones who see the problem, and it's coming closer, and it's coming closer, and it's here, and they still don't really care. I don't know, maybe the nihilists. But I think that most people are going to be somewhere around here. And this correlation in itself is nothing new, because I think we all know that the most successful companies have always been those who didn't sell products, but who sold ideas, like connection to larger groups and bigger systems which people want to belong to. And it's an old example, but you don't buy an Apple computer because it costs twice the price and you get half the performance for it. You buy it because it makes you feel like you belong to a certain group or you want to belong to. Maybe you can express your minimalism with it, but they sell something else and not the product itself. And so what is new, however, in my opinion, is that there are a few factors which are relatively new and which move us on a collective level, on a society level, more from like here, more to here, so which raises our awareness of problems, which was not there before in previous generations. And if this happens, this also is going to raise the demand for leadership impact. So what are those factors? Well, I picked out 3, which in my opinion are the 3 most important ones and which have not been there before for any other generation before us. What are those factors? The first one, in my opinion, is our standard of living. And let me try to explain what I mean by that. We, and especially the ones who are 30 now or younger, grew up with and have a higher standard of living than any generation before us. Probably than any generation ever, but definitely in the last 100 years, right? I mean, and that's even more true if we look at us here. Most of us are living here around Vienna, the world's most livable city, arguably. And at least that's what some institutes say. And also Austria is, in general, it's a quite wealthy country. And I would like to ask a question here as well. Who here in the room meditates regularly, or at least has tried to do so? Look around. I think that's more than half. At least it seems to be. What do you think if I would have asked this question, let's say 50 years ago, or even 100 years ago? Would the response have been the same or a different one? I think that if we are looking at Maslow's pyramid of needs, we can say that we, and again, especially those who were born in the 90s or later, we never really had to fight for our physiological needs, our basic needs. We kind of take it for granted that we have a roof over our head, that we have a refrigerator full of food, of innocent smoothies, of Oreo cookies, and of course, let's not forget the high-speed internet to stream Netflix. So this is really normal for us. We're born with this. Not for everybody, but for many. And I think the same goes for the safety needs. We, and I'm including myself here, we didn't have to fight for living a harm-free life. We basically take it for granted. Our grandparents still, they were partly in war. They had to fight. They knew what it's like to fight for your safety, what this really means and what kind of value this has. And our parents, they still grew up with this generation. But us, we know war from history books. We know it from documentations. Here, at least. And if we're looking at the next level, so love and belonging, these needs, I think it gets a bit more complicated already. But I still would argue that if you're born having the first 2 levels covered, it's always easier to be a loving and empathic human being. And then when you're here already, then you can sooner start to ask the questions of esteem. So, for example, respect. Do other people respect me? Do I respect other people or accept me? And can I accept myself? And I think these are questions which are quite high, especially in frequency, especially when you're talking to younger people. And the same goes for self-actualization. I think this is why we have so many meditation centers, yoga centers nowadays, because nowadays we have the option to do so. We don't have to care for these as much anymore. And of course, the Maslow pyramid of needs is not 100% scientifically correct. And also this, what I said now, doesn't apply to every person. But I think that we can see a tendency, like moving somewhere up there. And what can we kind of take away from this as leaders? I think we can take away that while young people are not only here anymore, but also here more than previous generations, we're still paying them here. And I think we can take away that we need to start also think about this part more than before. So also to start thinking about what do they really want? What is their, what kind of, to which groups do they feel connected to? What is their purpose? And I think that's especially true when we're talking about high potentials. I think they are sold on ideas, not so much on money, or not only money. So not that anyone says now, okay, I learned that I don't need to pay young people anymore. That wasn't the purpose. I think it just means also this. What is the second factor? The second factor is one which I think in here is not going to surprise anybody very much. I think it is technology. And more to be more specific, I think it's the internet. I think it's a fact that the internet is something quite new. I mean, it has been in a way like we have it now for maybe 15 years. And even 15 years ago, it was quite different than what we do now with it. We can nowadays, we can work from everywhere. We can send dog filter selfies to our friends, and we can catch Pokemon in our garages. At least that's what I heard that young people do nowadays, right? So it's a quite new phenomenon. And also to be quite serious, this is unprecedented. We've never had this before ever in human history. This level of connection, of awareness, what is going on in the world. And I think, yeah, this is why we have more awareness of also problems. Not only problems, but also. And I would like to do a thought experiment with you. I would like to reimagine the story of Greta Thunberg in a world where there is no internet. So let's assume there was no internet here, and so Greta, who is everywhere nowadays, or right now, she maybe, so last year she would have stayed home from school, she would have built her poster, and she would have then stood in front of the Stockholm Parliament and started to protest, to strike. Maybe after some time, some other people would have walked by and started engaging with her, she would have talked to them, and maybe a group of people would have formed and they would have protested with her. But would she ever have gotten the kind of strength and the voice to be heard by politicians? And if so, how long would it have taken for the movement to go from Stockholm to us here in Austria, for people to go on the streets here, let alone in New York City or anywhere else in the world where this is happening now? I think it would have been impossible to organize 4 million people to protest or to do whatever it is on once. So the odds probably would be higher that Greta would be sitting at her desk in school studying right now. I'm not saying this is what I want, but I just want to stress how important like the internet is for bringing awareness of what is going on. What is the third of those reasons? The third one is one which I think for us still seems to be further away and which we don't feel so much here yet, here in Austria or in Europe in general. In my opinion, it is overpopulation. And let me explain what I mean. I think it's simply a fact that our planet only has a specific amount of resources which it can offer and a specific amount of exploitation which it can take. Because it's a difference if you have a few thousand people driving SUVs and filling up pools and flying around, or if you have a few million or even billion. And studies actually have found out if we wanted to have the standard of living which we have in the European Union for everybody on the planet, how many people do you think could there be maximum on this planet? Any numbers? 5 billion? Any other ideas? 1 billion? Well, the study which I read was 2 billion people. And we're now 7.7 billion, and we're supposed to become 10 billion in 30 years from now. So I think that this is going to become a bigger issue more and more. And even now in Austria, although we don't feel it that much because we still have nice rivers, we have nice water, nice air. But if you look closer, I think, and if you have followed some of the political discussions in the last weeks, which were going on in Austria because of the election, then you might have heard some words as CO2 tax, or you might have heard climate change, or maybe refugees and building fences. And I think if you look closer, they also have a similar origin. And if you look at other places in the world, these problems are already quite close, or quite a lot closer than here. Like, for example, in South Africa, you have severe water crisis, shortages. Or in some Chinese cities, you have like polluted air where people get sick, or some do. And in Brazil right now, the rainforest is burning as we speak. And why is this the case? Because we're more people, and of course we need more space. We need more crops to grow food. We need for them to feed animals for us to eat them. And what we can take here, I think, again, is that this is going to get also a bigger question in the future. And who is going to address those questions if not leaders, right? And we are all in some way leaders. And I'm not saying that everybody has to do like big things, but it is, I think, everybody can contribute something. And I also want to really stress that this shouldn't just be like a dramatic topic all the time. I think that this is a huge potential. It's a huge potential also on an economic point of view, because of course every problem, every need, every desire which comes up, you can get a solution for it. And I think in the future it's going to be these companies who are going to be the most successful and the biggest and the most valuable ones who can combine the two worlds. So the world of leadership impact and purpose, and the world of financial stability. And I think that we need both. We need both because if we're just considering leadership impact and we're building castles in the sky and utopias, this is also not going to serve anybody, because it also needs to work on an economic point of view. So I turned to a model by Robert Dilts, who actually spent the last years intensively studying the success factors of the most successful companies worldwide. And he converted this into a model, and he says that there are 5 main factors which the most successful companies evenly distribute their energies and focus in order to be successful. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at the first 2 of those factors and look at them through the lens of leadership impact. So basically see what can we get out of a more financial stability oriented model if we add the ingredient of purpose or leadership impact. And what could be the first of those factors or areas? I think whenever we as leaders want to change something outside of us in the world, where should we usually start? Any ideas? With ourselves, yeah? Spot on, I would say. Yes, of course, it makes sense that if you want to lead other people and if you want to like talk to people on this level, of course you also need to be there as well in some way. So of course we do need like a mission where we want to see the world, or let's say our company or our peer group should be in 2 years, in 5 years, in 15 years. And we also need something like a mission, like what is my contribution to making this reality? And here I would like to share a story with you, which I think really highlights very much those different approaches and mindsets which one can have to work and leadership in general. Does anybody know these 6 guys up here? One? Okay. Well, the story goes like this. We are at a construction site. There's a huge cathedral behind us, and it's like half finished, and you have 6 stonemasons like working at the cathedral. And the first one, which seems to be the weakest and the least interested in what he's doing, he's being asked, "What are you doing here?" And he responds, looking at his watch, "Well, I'm waiting for time to go through so that I can finally go home and do something I really care about." The second one, which seems to be a bit less bored and does a bit better work, is being asked, "What are you doing here?" And he responds like really irritated and annoyed, like, "What does it look like I'm doing here? I'm hitting a rock." The third one, who seems to be quite neutral about what he's doing, he is being asked, "What are you doing here?" And he responds quite pragmatically, "Well, I'm using my skills in order to craft a piece of stone." The fourth one, who does a decent job and is also quite motivated, is also asked, "What are you doing here?" And he responds, quite determined, "Well, I'm providing for my family and I'm putting my kids through school." The fifth one, who is doing an excellent job, and he's also making sure that the other workers have everything they need in order to do their job as well. When he's being asked, "What are you doing?" he responds, like really proudly, "Well, I'm a master stonemason and I'm building a cathedral," pointing at the cathedral. And the last one, which is the most experienced one, and he seems to be really into what he's doing, and he's really like focused and he's becoming one with his tools. When he's being asked, "What are you doing?" he responds with great reverence, "I'm creating an environment where people can connect to their souls." And I think this shows 6 different mindsets, approaches to how we can go about work, from seeing work as a necessary evil to seeing it as really a calling or maybe like destiny and everything in between. And I would like you to take a moment and reflect for yourself, which of those stonemasons are you? And maybe you already have held some small talk today, or you're going to have some more today later, and people might ask you, "What are you doing?" What are you going to respond? And I know that also from myself, when people ask me, "What are you doing?" sometimes I'm telling, "Well, I'm doing trainings because our customers ask us to do." And then I'm like, I'm probably the second one who's saying I'm hitting a rock, because I'm not even talking about my skills, which I have. And maybe a third question, if you're a leader and you have a team under you, what do you think your team members, when they are being asked privately, like away from work, "What are you doing?" what do they respond? The second of those areas also makes sense now after talking about ourselves. We're talking now about our opposite, so about the customer, the market. And it makes sense that we need to understand the market before creating like purposeful products and leadership impact. And in order to understand this, I think we already saw from the stonemason example that people are, especially the last 3 of them, they are more than what we sometimes think people are. They feel connected to bigger systems. The fourth one might feel connected to his family. The fifth one, he creates something which will stand there even after his death. And the sixth one, even to something even bigger. So I think we have to understand people as this as well. We have to understand that people are like also here in the higher levels and not only here. And again, I want to stress, I'm not saying that we're only here, but also here. And more here now than before compared to past generations. So we have to understand that people feel connected to peer groups, to their family, to maybe they feel connected, okay, I'm an Austrian citizenship, or I don't know, I'm Generation X, and this is what Generation X does. And if we understand this connection, then we can also be more purposeful leaders. And I think that this is something which we can take away for our own practice. I hope that I could give you some ideas and inspiration on why maybe we need more leadership impact nowadays than we needed in the past. Because if we all want to create a world where people want to belong to, then it's important to understand that you need not only this money, but you also need the purpose or impactful money. And I hope that you will all have enough money when you go out of this day. Leadership impact, agile leadership means to adapt to the changes around us. And I think it's important that we don't overlook one of the biggest waves of change which is rolling at us right now, the wave of leadership impact. Thank you very much.